And welcome back. Next up, we have one of my all-time favorite people, Tiffany Jernigan. So Tiffany actually joined my team earlier this year, and I've had the privilege and the pleasure of working closely with her on a number of projects. And Tiffany is about to drop some knowledge bombs on us and teach us how to fill in some of the Kubernetes gaps using both open source and Tanzu products in order to make your clusters production ready. Take it away, Tiffany.
Why are you so nice, Paul? But yeah, hi, I'm Tiffany Jernigan. I started on the developer advocacy team like basically 5 months ago now. So I've been learning a lot of cool new things, and I wanted to share some of that stuff with all of you. So as you mentioned, I'm going to be talking about ways to make your Kubernetes clusters production ready, and they'll be using things in using Tanzu and then different things that are open source as well. This is only a 25-minute slot, so I'll be going over things fairly quickly, but to at least give people an idea of what is out there so you can look at it later. Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's just the intro. If you have any questions for me outside of this entire event, my Twitter is listed there and also on the bottom of the rest of the slides. So when you first started tinkering around with containers in Kubernetes, you likely created a cluster locally, or maybe like on a set of managed servers. Maybe you ran like the basic Nginx deployment in the docs, or you tried out the guestbook application. And maybe you ran your own application and created the resources needed for it to run. Well, now you want to move your dev applications to production. There are quite a few things to consider when you're making this move. So some of them are, how will I manage my clusters, especially if they're not all co-located? How will I get visibility into my cluster? Is there an easier way to see how my resources are doing? What about metrics? How will I make sure my images are secure and that they get scanned and get signed? What do I do if I lose state in my cluster or something went very wrong and I need to revert it, or like maybe I need to move my resources to another cluster? Well, this is where these tools, Tanzu Mission Control or TMC, come in for cluster management. For introspection, there's TMC, Tanzu Observability, and Octant. There's Harbor for registry. There's Valero for backups. And of course, these are only like a small subset of the many options out there and of only a few of the things that you may need to consider when going to production. So let's go and dig into these different tools. So first I'm going to start with TMC. So TMC is basically this central place where you can see and manage all of your clusters in one space. You can attach any conformant Kubernetes clusters that you already have on-prem or in the cloud, or you can just directly provision, scale, upgrade, or delete clusters with Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid runtime, which TMC will run for you. So you can also do things like creating or managing policies across one or multiple clusters. And they can be used to apply like consistent policies, such as like things for access, networking, your container registry. And you can choose like a specific set of clusters or namespaces that you want to run this for. There's also some built-in integrations. So there's integration with Tanzu Observability for Wavefront for things like observability and diagnostics. There's backing up of your clusters and resources with Velero. There are cluster inspections, and that uses Sonoboy. And then you can also do things like implementing centralized authentication and authorization and federated identity from like multiple sources such as Active Directory or LDAP. And we'll be digging into some of this stuff in the demo. So now let's look at Tanzu Observability by Wavefront. So when working with a Kubernetes cluster, there's pre-built dashboards of your Kubernetes cluster, and this has like default metrics. You can kind of see a snippet there of the part of the dashboard for a cluster that I was running. And you can look at things like CPU utilization, memory, etc. And there are a bunch of other like integrations that you can have as well. So this is specifically things that are coming off of my Kubernetes cluster with my Wavefront or Tanzu Observability and TMC integration. But you can also integrate with other tools such as like Spring Boot. You can also create your own custom charts, and then you can have your own metrics, and that could be things coming from like Prometheus, for instance, if you've already been using that. And based on your chosen metrics, whether they're ones that you created or they were already there, you can create specific types of alerting as well. There's also a way to look at distributed tracing, and you can do integrations with things such as like Spring Cloud Sleuth, Zipkin, and Jaeger, depending on what you're looking for. So now begins the open source projects. I know I didn't mention Octant in the description of this talk, but I figure I wanted to at least quickly go over it since it makes it a lot easier to visually see what you have up and running versus doing things like maybe running a watch. So Octant basically is an open source Kubernetes dashboard, and you can see what all the resources you're running. You can dig into them, look into logs, etc. So I'll be showing that throughout the demo as well. So next, there's Harbor. So Harbor is an open source container registry. It fairly recently graduated as a CNCF project. It can, of course, hold container images. It also can have Helm charts. And then it also has integration with image scanning tools such as Trivy and Claire. And if you're unfamiliar with image scanning, basically it's done to ensure that your images are free from vulnerabilities. And it also assigns your images as trusted. And lastly, there's Velero. So Velero is, again, also open source. It's used for backing up and migrating your Kubernetes resources and persistent volumes. So say if you want to move to another cluster, but keep all of the resources that you have, or say something happens to your database and you need to recover it. You can basically set up backups as you on a recurring state, or you can create individual ones as you go through. So I know I went through that kind of quickly, but I'll actually be showing you stuff now, as here is the part that we do the live demo and hope that nothing breaks, because live demos. All right, so let me end the show here and switch over. Okay, so here is the first page of what you get to if you're on TMC. So it looks a little squished right now because I am trying to make multiple things visible on my screen. But it starts on the clusters page. If you pop over the side, you can see all the different things there, like cluster groups, which I'll go into some of these in a second. So basically, right now, there are a few things that are already running. Just to give you an idea, you can do things like attaching a cluster, or you can create a new cluster. If we look down here, there are different clusters in various places. You can, if I scroll over a little further, you can see that there are clusters that are running on vSphere that got attached. There's ones from GCP, AWS. There's ones from Azure, and then there's ones that are created by TMC itself using TKG. So basically, if you want to create your own cluster, there are some permissions that you need to give to AWS. So currently, TKG uses AWS. So there's account credentials that you need to give permission for creating resources in AWS. So first, there is a general account credential for doing that. You can choose one of two types. There's the cluster lifecycle, and this is, again, the one that is for dealing with your clusters themselves. There's also one for data protection, and this data protection one is the credential that's needed for storing your backups that are for Valero. So I already went ahead and created some myself. So I have my Tiffany one, which is for creating my clusters, etc. And then I have one for data protection. And it's pretty simple. If you click on it, if you choose the one you want, and then you give it a name, and then there's a template that gets generated, and then you go over to AWS, and in CloudFormation and such, you can end up setting all this stuff up, and it will then see it over in here. I'm not going to go through that now because it should be fairly explanatory, and of course, you can ask me questions about it afterward. So if we go over here, so there's this concept of cluster groups. So basically, you can decide to have a specific subset of your clusters within a certain cluster group. And with these cluster groups, you can apply a set of like common policies to all of those, or even just use it as a simple way to just find your clusters only. So for instance, this TMC account is shared, so it's not just mine. So I went through and created my own. So I just called it TFJ. And then you can give it labels. I didn't, and you can see a cluster from GKE that I pulled in, and then 2 clusters that I have running. There's also this concept of workspaces. And then workspaces, you can basically use it to group namespaces from across different clusters, and that can be shared across different teams. So by default, at least in like cluster groups, for instance, there's a default cluster group. So you can just start there if you don't want to create your own. So to create a cluster, we basically just go here, click create cluster. I click the credential that I want to use. I can give it a name. So I could call it Spring One. And then for my cluster group, I can choose whichever one I want, but I want to just stick it in my existing one for TFJ. Then I could add these things if I'd like, but for now I'm not. Then this is where you choose, okay, what region am I putting in? So I'm in Seattle, so I'm going to put US West 2, and that's the Oregon region that's the closest. You can use an existing VPC or create your own. I am just going to create my own for this one. Then you just can change the different things that you want for your configuration for your CIDRs. I'm just going to leave them as is. You can choose then also if you want to have your control plane to have a single node or to be highly available. Since I'm just going to be doing a demo, I'm just going to create a single node. But in general, it is good to have high availability in case something goes down so your entire cluster doesn't go down. So I will do that. And then you can see what the size of that was. And then there's also a default node pool, and it's M5 large and the number of worker nodes. So I'm just going to have this completely as default just to give you an idea of this and how to enable some things. And I'm going to, for the rest of the demo, I'll be using a cluster that I already created in here. So if I just go and then I click create cluster. So while that is doing its thing, I'm going to jump back over to the clusters. And if, say, we go over to my TFJ cluster. So there's a bunch of different things that you can see within here. So like there's a general overview. You can see things like what's the provider, versions, how many control plane nodes you have. There's allocated CPU. There's a bunch of these things turn green whenever they're healthy. So as your cluster is setting up, it will start installing different things. And as each thing is healthy, you will get a check mark next to it. And then it'll also show you the nodes. And then there's for integrations, I guess first I should mention there for Wavefront, you have at the current moment, first you need to go over to administration and then go to integrations. And then here, there will be a button that says to enable it. And I already did that. So if we jump back over here, once you do that, you can add an integration. And then here you end up, if you go to your Wavefront console and click on, I guess I could just show it here, but if you click on the little dot, like gear, and then click on your name, in there is, it'll show your API URL and you can create a API key. I already did that. So then you can put those things in here. And then it will, I'm not going to do in this cluster, I'll show it in a different one. But basically, it will create your collector and your proxy and have that running. The reason that I am not doing the built-in integrated one is because for my cluster, I need to be able to enable Zipkin, and currently that is not possible from the direct integration. Okay, so I'm going to go and jump to running some stuff in the cluster since now I am down to 10 minutes. If we go look, so first, I already have Harbor running. It's running in a different cluster just because I know that I will probably break my demo if I don't. do it right. So if we look over at Harbor, basically you can see different projects. By default, there is just library, and then you can create your own. So I have the demo project, and this has applications that I'll show in a second that I'll be running. And then if say I want to go and push some, so first you have to do a Docker login. I already did that, so I don't share the password and such. But if I wanted to push something up to the repo, I could just do my regular Docker tag. And then, so if I'm tagging Nginx, and then the way I have my registry set up, that it's located at this location, I give it the project name and then Nginx. And then if I do Docker push, you can see that it is pushing it up there. And then if I go over here shortly after, there we go. If I refresh, you can see that Nginx there. And then if we wanted, we could run it as well. Okay. There is also, you can also add Helm charts. So if I wanted to do, like, if I want to do Helm fetch, because I already have the repo pulled, Bitnami and then Nginx, then I could do a Helm repo add. Oops, I can't type. Okay, so you give it a name. The way that Harbor does it is it's a similar path as here, but you have chart repo as well. So I add that and then do Helm repo update, and it pulls everything from there. And then I could do Helm install. Oops, I did something wrong there. Oh, yeah, I see what I did. No, I don't actually see what I did. I will look into that a bit later. I typed something wrong. We'll check that later. But there's another way to actually upload. So if I do something like Helm fetch, if I fetch it, if I look here, I can see the Nginx, and I can do an upload and then browse for the file and then put Nginx and then upload it. So then that shows up there. Okay, so I'm going to go over to this Spring Pet Clinic app. Basically, it is a Spring application that's running that basically shows like veterinarians and other things like that. I'll explain it in a bit. So first, I need to export my repository prefix. So if I do that, and I set it to the same demo one, and then basically, I already ran this Maven command. It will build my images using Paketo build packs, and it will build my Java code. And then it will end up pushing those to that repository that I just listed. So there is a namespace, general namespace. So if I create that, and then I created a script that which I'll show in a second, that will deploy to Wavefront. So this is the part that I am doing separately from how you can just set it up in TMC. And I am using the Helm chart to basically give it parameters for using Zipkin, so that way it can find traces on my MySQL queries. So if I run that, and then if I apply these init services, so if I look over here, there are several different things for init services. So there's API gateway, there's something for who are the customers, there's who are the vets, and who are the visitors. And this will make more sense when I actually like show it. So if I get all my pods and services, you can see that they are up and running. So if I also check here, I can see that my services are there. And for the API gateway, it creates a load balancer that you can get to. So if I add all of, I- you can run it directly with just those applications, but if you want to have a database that is sticking around, you can create a MySQL database, for instance. So I'm creating that. And then I have this script that will basically deploy a bunch, where are they? It'll deploy, create all these deployments. So a deployment for each of my like services, so my vet service. And then in here, there's a Spring data source URL, and this is for the MySQL stuff. So basically, I'm giving it where that service is that I just created. Um, there's a bunch of queries that you can give it for the Brave, and then there's like something, for instance, for setting for Zipkin. If we look here for exporting to Wavefront, you need to have the proxy, and this is where my Wavefront proxy is currently running. So if we go back here, and if I run that, so this is where I was talking about if you have Okta installed, you can just run Okta. And basically here I can see everything that I have. If I go to my Spring Pet Clinic, basically you can see as it's creating things and then they're coming up. And then you can dig into all of these and look into logs, etc. So basically I just need one more to end up coming up, and then my application should be up and running. So if I do, I created an alias. So KP is for my Bring Pet Clinic. So if I just do KP and then I do get services, I can, I can see my API gateway load balancer path. So if I copy that and go over to that, let's see, this one's still not up, but other parts should be for now. Yeah. So if I click and like go to owners, I can see a bunch of people. If I, for instance, I can go and register someone, so I can make myself, and I'm just putting random stuff. So I've created myself, and then if I look at veterinarians. So if we jump over to Wavefront, if I look at the Kubernetes clusters, I can see like I can put my specific cluster. So this one's TFJ. So let's see. Why is it not? Of course, things would not work during a demo. Okay, for some reason, my deployment's not working. So I'm going to jump over to my other cluster because backups are good. So if I go over here and if I get this service, if I go to that path here, so then if I look at all the owners I had created myself, for instance, and if I click on veterinarians and do some other jumping around, if I go here, I can dig into all of the information here that you can see on the different charts. You can also create your own, but there's also this cool thing if you go to traces, and here, if you do most recent, you can actually see the things that I was doing most recently. So the get, and if I were to do a post and all that, you can see that as well. And then you can dig into them, see kind of what is happening there. It's hard to scroll with the way I have my screen set. And then there's also things like an application. Oops. There should be an application map, but currently I'm not getting it to work. I'm having a bunch of fun today. So basically, like, there's a bunch of things you can go in there. You can create your own alerts and set those to fire. So I guess right now, the next thing to do, the last thing that I want to quickly do is, so if I have all my pods, so if I have all those, or KP get pods, if I delete my like my customers' databases, for instance, or first, actually, if we head back over to Tanzu Mission Control, if I go to my TFJ cluster, if I go to data protection and create a backup, and if I just back up my error cluster now and click create, it is quickly creating a backup. Okay. Worst case, I'll just back it up to an old one. But okay, cool. So I now have that backup. So basically, if I just go through, I delete my database. If I delete those, and then if I do, if I go back over here, if I look at the owners, they're all gone. So basically what I need to do is I just go and I can, let's see. So it's really, all right. It's hard to see when you're, there we go. Go here, restore backup, restore the entire backup. I'll just call restore. And then that should not take very long, but if you can see that those ones are getting ready. And I think I'm pretty much out of time, but what would end up happening is that those would, as they start running, then eventually my database
Tiffany,
should
I'm
end up
so
coming back
sorry
up.
I have to cut you off there. We
Yep.
are at time. I guess we'll never know
Many
if the
things.
backups worked or not. Now, if Disney is the happiest place on earth, I think we just learned that production is a close second. So thanks so much, Tiffany. And of all the Tiffany J's at VMware, you are definitely in the top 5. Everyone, don't forget to join Tiffany for Q&A.